Hi, my name is Rachel, and I am going to be reading Rediscover the Saints by Matthew Kelly. So I'm doing this video so that you can listen along or follow along as we do this reading this year in Trinidad and Tobago. Prologue, the first saint. They say when the sun rises, you never know how a day will end. And I have to say that I could not have imagined how some of my days ended, one in particular. I never felt good about stealing. Breaking the law and hurting innocent people didn't bring me any joy, but I figured it was either them or me. The thing is, I was so hungry, and the bread, or the fish, or the meat was right there in front of me. I knew if I didn't take it, I would die, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I suppose we all have that basic survival instinct, but most of the people who judge people like me have never been on the razor's edge of survival. It breeds desperation, and desperate people do desperate things. So, I did what I had to do. I became a thief. Everybody was always better off than I was. My mother died when I was 4, and my father threw me out to fend for myself when I was 5, and from that day on, stealing food became a daily priority. I wanted to live. I was young, but I still knew it was wrong, so I would justify it to myself. They have plenty. They don't miss one piece of fish. It's not the difference between life and death for them. They will live, and so will I. Stealing one fish led to stealing 2 fish. Then one day I saw an amazing bowl of fruit, and I stole that. Eating fruit made me want bread and wine and all the things that rich people ate. But I quickly discovered that a guy needs more than just food. Aren't I entitled to a little more? I asked myself. And before too long, I was stealing all sorts of things. Clothes, sandals, a cart, even a donkey. It turned out I was a good thief. I told myself that I wouldn't be forever. But we tell ourselves so many things, don't we? I thought that someday I would change and find a way to make an honest living. But one thing leads to the next, and this is how the years pass. When I was 15, I started to think that if I was getting away with this much in a small town, why not move up to a village or even a city? This got me wondering what sorts of amazing things might be in those places. And a few months later, I was on my way. As I arrived in the first village, a thought crossed my mind. Nobody knows me here. Nobody knows I am a thief. This is my chance to start afresh. I thought about getting a job and making an honest living. But then the doubts began to fill my mind. Who are you kidding? The only thing you know how to do is steal. I pushed that thought out of my mind and said to myself, You could get good at something else, something respectable. But later that night, my stomach began to growl. I had been walking all day, and once again my hunger got the better of me. The sun was setting and the traders were packing up their goods in the marketplace, which is a perfect time to steal because they aren't paying attention. It wasn't long before I had a reputation as a thief just like I'd had in my hometown. That's when I decided to make my way to the big city. Some people called it Jerusalem and others called it the City of David. I had once asked a man in the marketplace when I was younger, who was David and why do they call it his city? But he laughed at me and turned back to his conversation muttering, "Don't your parents teach you anything?" Then, when I arrived in Jerusalem, I was amazed. I had never seen anything like it. There were so many people and so many traders and trades I had never thought about. People spent their whole lives making pots or tables, carts, or even lanterns. I had never really thought about where those things came from, but they dawned on me that real people make them. Once again, that thought filled my mind. Nobody knows me here. Nobody knows I am a thief. This is my chance to start afresh. My heart swelled with hope that maybe, just maybe, I could turn my life around. I had a few coins, so I would not be hungry tonight. I could buy food like an honest man. That night, I fell asleep dreaming about how good it would be not to always feel anxious about getting recognized and caught. I have been anxious and afraid my whole life, I thought, and the idea of putting all that behind me made me feel light and happy. Next day, I went to apply for a job, first as a pot maker, then as a carpenter, and next at the place where they made lanterns. But all the foremen sent me away, saying I didn't have any experience. But my hope was still alive, and I had a little money still, so I bought myself some food and again fell asleep, hoping for a better life. For days I went from one trader to the next, asking for a chance. "I'll do anything," I said to them, but they sent me away. I didn't know anything about fishing or making wine or tending animals. How could I? Life is not fair, I started to think to myself again. And I had told myself this my whole life. Each day I had fewer coins left in the worn purse I had stolen many years ago, and the fear and anxiety began to creep back into my heart. It wasn't long before I was back to doing the only thing I had ever known. I remember the first day I got back to stealing. My purse was empty and I was sad. I knew what I was going to do. I knew what I needed to do to survive, but I didn't want to do it. While I was feeling sorry for myself, I saw a huge crowd. My instincts kicked in. Crowds are good for thieving. Making my way through the crowd looking for someone to target, I realized they were listening to one of those itinerant preachers. The sun shines on the just and the unjust alike, I heard him say. Words, 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 just words. In my cynicism, I thought to myself, they sound good, but right now the sun sure isn't shining down on me. A few days later, I saw the same man, and I overheard someone call him the Son of David. There was no crowd this time, just a small group of about 12 men, so I moved a little closer and heard one of the men ask him, Lord, if another man wrongs me, how many times should I forgive him? 7? The preacher smiled and said, I know 7 times seems more than just, even generous. But I tell you, you should forgive him 77 times. The men gathered around him were astonished. I was astonished too, but because I knew people were not like that. Then he started talking about his kingdom, a kingdom that was not of this world, where people could live forever. None of this made any sense to me, so I wandered off. The days passed, and I reluctantly went back to doing whatever I had to do just to survive. But it was harder than ever to steal. My heart just was not in it. I yearned for something else, something different, something more. I longed to go to sleep every night as peaceful and unafraid as I had been that first night in Jerusalem. But the fear and anxiety of the poor began to dominate my heart again. The following spring, the city came to life in a way that I had never seen it. The pilgrims are coming for the celebration in the temple, I heard people say. One night, while I was eating at my favorite inn, I heard another thief say, during the festival, I will be able to steal enough gold, silver, and denarii to take care of my family for a year. A new hope began to rise up in me. If I could get such a haul, I could stop stealing and try again to find something respectable to do. For months, I would be able to go to bed with hope each night, like I had that first night in Jerusalem. As the crowds made their way into the city for the celebrations, I noticed a wealthy trader. I followed him for a few days, learning his routines, and noticed that he had a chest of coins that he opened with a key each morning to take out what he needed for the day. I waited patiently for the right moment. I was confident because I was a good thief. It was probably the only thing I had ever been good at. The next morning, after the trader had left for the day, I approached his caravan. There was the chest. I felt bad about taking it all, but I had to get away as quickly as possible. I picked up the chest, and it was much heavier than I expected. My heart soared with hope that this might be the last time I had to steal. Wrapping the chest in a cloak, I tucked it under my arm and turned around to leave. My heart sank. 3 Roman soldiers were standing there watching, waiting, and that was the end of my life as a thief. They arrested me and threw me into prison. I sat there in prison thinking about my life. I had regrets, but I had done what I had to do to survive. I tried to walk a better path, but life can be so cruel. At that moment, I looked up and I saw one of the guards talking to his son. They were smiling and laughing, and the father took his son in his arms, hugged him, and tousled his hair. I began to cry. I was so surprised at my reaction. I hadn't cried since I was a boy. At first, I didn't know why I was crying. But then a shaft of light crossed my face, and it occurred to me. Nobody had ever talked to me like that father spoke to his son. Nobody ever laughed and smiled with me like that father did with his son. Nobody had ever hugged me like he hugged his boy. Nobody had ever in my whole life tousled my hair like that soldier had tousled his son's hair. And the thing is, it seemed so natural. I thought about my life and I thought about how different that boy's life was from mine. And I wondered so many things. The next thing I knew, the guards were waking me. I must have fallen asleep. It was time. The Romans crucified thieves and it was my turn. They took me and another thief, Justus, to a small hill outside the city to crucify us. I had heard of this place and had always avoided it, but there was no avoiding it now. I would die as I had lived, anxious and afraid. That thought was interrupted by a commotion. It was another criminal and a rowdy crowd. But when I looked closely at him, I realized it was that son of David person. What did he do? I thought to myself. I would die as I had lived, anonymous and ignored. Everyone was looking at the preacher. Nobody cared that I was about to die. There were women crying, and I heard someone say one of the women was the man's mother. For the first time in my life, I was glad my mother was dead. I wouldn't have wanted her here. No mother should have to see her son die. The soldiers nailed us each to a wooden cross. The pain was excruciating. Why are men so cruel to each other? I thought. Then the other thief, Justus, cried out, Jesus, look at me. I had heard that name before. He had been doing miracles and people had been saying he was the Messiah. Was this really him? What had he done to deserve this? As a criminal, you get to know other criminals, and it was clear to me that this man Jesus was no criminal. The other thief kept taunting Jesus, mocking him, ridiculing him, and some of the crowd joined him. I thought you were the Christ, Justus said. If you are the Christ, prove it. Save yourself, and while you're at it, save us." The guards had been much crueler to Jesus than they had been to me. I could see he was in agony. "Shut up, Justus," I found myself saying. "What has he done wrong? We are getting what we deserve, but he hasn't done anything to deserve this." At that moment, I felt Jesus looking at me. I was suffocating, but I raised my eyes to meet his, and he looked at me like nobody had ever looked at me before. It was the first time in my life that I felt like anyone really saw me. And he had this look in his eyes that said, "Everything is going to be all right." It was a moment like no other in my life. He was a man like no other man I had ever known or even heard about. And I said to him, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." As he looked at me, I thought he was trying to smile. And then he said, "I promise you, today you will be with me in paradise." Today I hear people calling me Saint Dismas. It seemed strange to me the first time I heard it. But Jesus and death and eternity have taught me that God's ways are gloriously different from the ways of man. They say every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. If I could lean in close to you and whisper something in your ear, it would be this: if there are pieces of your past that are weighing you down, it's time to leave them behind. You are not what is happening to you. You are someone unimaginably greater than you have ever considered. And maybe it's time to consider all the possibilities that are within you.